You've probably seen the trailers or gameplay for this highly anticipated anime-stylized action RPG, Granblue Fantasy Relink. Maybe you've actually played the free PlayStation demo to get a gist of the core gameplay, but even with those details factored in, you really don't know what you're in for with the full game because it's way different to a standard traditional action RPG game like it first appears to be. You see, Relink actually takes some of the better elements of different game series like Monster Hunter and the Tales of and more, with its various different gameplay mechanics, quest flow, combat, and multiplayer. We've played over 100 hours together as myself and 2-6 powered through the game's story, and then the subsequent questing system, which honestly has us kind of hooked. I'm going to try my best to not spoil anything, so no details of the story itself will be mentioned or spoiled, and we'll be using some very early gameplay or the official trailers, so you don't have to worry about us showing you anything that isn't already out there. But we will mention some of the different gameplay systems and elements as they're prudent to explaining how the game flows and progresses as you start ranking up and unlocking harder quests in the post-campaign gameplay. So let's go over broadly what the game as a whole is and what you can expect from it, because we were way off with what we thought the game would be, and I mean that in a good way. You start the game off with a set roster of characters, which is the crew of the Grand Cypher, your airship, which after a short tutorial section, you can then switch between and play as them or have them in your party throughout the game. Progressing the story will be your first focus, and this will take you through the various different areas, or Sky Islands as they're called in Relink. Cygames have consistently marketed the story as around 20 hours in length, and although this is definitely possible depending on your playstyle, we feel for the majority of players it will actually come in at around 10 hours. The story itself is very interesting with lots of boss fights and epic moments, but did feel short in comparison to our expectations. However, if you enjoy trying out all of the different characters, doing quests and farming along the way, as well as leveling them up so that you can use them in your party as you get further and further through the story, then naturally it will take longer to complete. Whereas if you just want to go back to back and run through the story missions, you will be slightly underpowered, but with enough skill you can still complete them, and that will make the story a lot shorter. So the story's duration all depends on how you enjoy playing your games. Now, while the story itself is a fun part of the game, it really ends up being a lesser focus of the overall experience. As you progress in the story, as well as other objectives, you'll unlock additional crewmate vouchers, letting you unlock more characters into your roster, each with a massively different playstyle and role. But then after finishing the story, you go on to start your progression into the game's questing system. The best way to explain this to all of you is to think of a Monster Hunter game. You have a story, but also the repeatable hunts or quests to farm either gear in solo or multiplayer online with other people. Well, Relink has kind of the same flow. There's a full story, but also the quest board with different mission types from horde battles to defense missions and most importantly, bosses to farm. In Monster Hunter, you also have all the weapons to try out, to learn and grind, and in Relink, you have all of the characters which function and play differently, each needing to be leveled up and grinded to increase in their power if you want to take them to the higher level content. You see, Granblue Fantasy Relink also has a difficulty system whereby after completing the story, you will need to complete marked quests, kind of like urgent quests, that will then unlock more missions for you, eventually leading to a rank up quest which will unlock a whole new tier of difficulty. So the game basically has its own version of low rank, high rank and so on, with normal, easy, hard and even more difficulty levels to unlock. This means there is a lot to do, unlock and experience even after you've finished the story when you start getting into the questing. Furthermore, these different rank up tiers keep actually progressing the story, and there's entire missions with big impact on certain story characters and the world, which you would only experience if you actually get to these higher and higher difficulty quests. Which means if you include the time it takes to go through this questing system to get these extra missions, which are pretty awesome, then the story is substantially longer. But it's not like these repeatable missions are unique content, so it doesn't really count. And it's a bit of a shame because some of these missions are actually really awesome, and we think the average player probably won't get to experience them unless they keep playing even after they think the story is over. In this aspect, the game really does just keep on giving, and we were always discovering entirely new progression systems, ways to improve our weapon or higher level sigils as we got further and further through the questing. We often found we thought we were at the end only to discover that there was more and more each time we ranked up and unlocked a higher difficulty. I won't show anything, but there is some awesome stuff awaiting you guys at the very highest final difficulty level. Also, the game has some really well thought out quality of life and different gameplay mechanics that make playing the game a lot more enjoyable and smooth, unlike other games that could potentially fit in this genre. There's a really easy to use wishlist system for finding specific materials and items that you need, loads of tips in the in-game journal, and a bunch more things that just make your life easier as you play through. Then with all of this, you can factor in that the game has many different characters which all level up, unlock masteries, and require weapon upgrades individually, making the total possible playtime exponentially higher if you're someone that doesn't like sticking to one single character. And these characters really make the game shine because they're all incredibly designed with totally different playstyles, strengths, and functions. But if you're someone that doesn't like to experiment and try different characters out, then of course you'll lose out on a lot of additional time and content leveling those guys up. But in general, you'll be testing different characters out in the training room, learning combos, and even making builds with the in-game sigil system, which offers your character a ton of different traits to increase their damage, utility, or survivability. For example, I've been loving Siegfried and have fully committed to maxing him out with loads of damaging skills to get those big meaty chops with his greatsword. But it does feel really good to try a new and different character, and it sort of makes you want to start progressing them for that extra variety. For example, there's another character called Ferry that is totally different and interesting, and I genuinely might need to switch to her and start grinding again to get her up to a higher level, and that's just one of the many characters, which by the way, there are more characters planned in DLC after release, with 2 that we've seen so far looking pretty awesome. Now let's touch on performance and platforms, because I have now played this on PlayStation 5 via the free demo, my full playthrough on PC, and have some playtime on my Steam Deck by trying out some of the quests to see how it plays. In my experience, PlayStation felt alright to play on. I would say the demo felt as though it had some input lag or perhaps a bit of variable frame rate, making it feel a little off, because on PC, which I do have a high-end setup, it runs buttery smooth, looks great, obviously it has stylized graphics so it's not a pure fidelity focused game, and the inputs felt responsive, which is quite important because you will be doing things like guarding, dodging, perfect guarding and dodging, and even timed inputs on certain characters' attacks. Interestingly, I've had no crashes, stutters, or frame rate drops, or even issues with the multiplayer, so it seems extremely stable in this way, but the game hadn't launched yet, so the servers haven't been under stress. For the Steam Deck, it is good news as it was pick up and play for me without any tweaking needed. The game is designed with the controller in mind, so it's mostly seamless to adjust to the controls, and it's great when docked with a controller. I haven't tested it loads, but I had no crashes, although I was lucky to get higher than 40 FPS, with it being very variable in an actual quest, which isn't ideal for a game with a large focus on timed inputs. It was definitely alright and playable, but it wouldn't be my first choice to play on as it's just so smooth on a full PC. I personally would recommend playing it on PC if that's an option for you, just because it feels great to play with higher frame rates and seemingly no drawbacks. Overall, Granblue Fantasy Relink is really more similar to a hunting game than a pure action RPG. It has crazy boss fights, cutscenes, characters, and abilities that you would expect from a more traditional anime action RPG, but also the replayability, diverse playstyles, and progression of a hunting game with more story that's unlocked along the way. So this is a game I would feel comfortable recommending to someone who's looking for either a romp of an anime story, albeit a short one, as well as someone hoping to get hours and hours of solo or multiplayer boss battles in with tons of different and unique characters to play, somewhat akin to something like the weapons in a Monster Hunter game. The game is a fantastic blend of both the action RPG and hunting genre, but the lack of content does bring it down a notch from standing aside some of these great titles that many of you know and love. We absolutely loved the way the game keeps on giving, and the core gameplay is super addictive, with both myself and 2.6 sinking hours into it without realizing how late in the day it actually gets. But it's not without its drawbacks. The game has an okay range of monsters and bosses, but let me tell you, you will be fighting some of these bosses over and over again to get into the higher and higher difficulties, and this is probably where the game suffers most. You will likely get tired of certain bosses and their different various elemental versions by the time you're 30 or 40 hours in, and you do need to farm and defeat them in order to progress. If the game had double the number of unique boss types and a longer story, this could have been a masterpiece title. However, due to a couple of these shortfalls, it does bring the game down a notch, simply because the lack of variety ends up making it a bit repetitive. But for Cygames' first entry into this space, it's actually very impressive, does things differently, and is a bunch of fun throughout. So we do still feel this is a top tier title. Oddly enough, this is where this game is one of the very, very rare games that would actually really benefit from being a live service. And trust me, I don't say this lightly, as often we do not want a live service game. But in this instance, it's actually incredibly well stanced to have everything in place to be a superb game as a service if they dropped frequent and regular new characters to play, additional boss types and new enemies, higher difficulties, raids, and even additional or higher level sigils. So this might be one of the first games I ever feel like could have been better as a live service game, which is something I didn't really think I would ever say. But don't let these drawbacks be the main takeaway. The story is still a bunch of fun, the actual boss fights they have are pretty awesome and engaging, the character variety is incredible and each one feels unique and different to play, and it's a blast to jump in a multiplayer quest with your buddies. Make sure to stay subscribed below because we're going to have more Granblue Fantasy Relink content and guides coming your way soon. Drop a like if you enjoyed the video, and thank you so much for watching.